Thank you, Torrin. Please rise with me. I'd like to start with an African village song, a call and response song, that the words in English mean, "We are one people, united in spirit, united in song." And it's call and response, so I'll sing a line and then you sing it back to me. All right? With me? Okay. So you won't be able to read my lips, you just have to listen. Goes like this. Baba la goomba la avise. Baba la goomba la avise. Baba la goomba la avise. Whoa na 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 avise. Whoa na 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 avise. Whoa na 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 avise. 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 Baba la goomba la avise. Baba la goomba la avise. Whoa na 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 avise. Whoa na 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 avise. 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 Thank you. There, that feels better. You graduates today are amazing. You have my respect and my awe. You've accomplished something I never did. Until just a couple of years ago, I never had a BA, or at least I didn't think I did. I'd studied architecture at the University of Minnesota, but I did it during the 60s, and I kept dropping out and hitchhiking around the world and coming back and dropping out again. And then a few years ago, a friend of mine who was a fellow Waldorf teacher and the grandson of Albert Schweitzer asked me to help him start a college based on the life example of Schweitzer. And he said, "Eric, you're pathologically entrepreneurial. Would you help me start a college?" And I said, "Sure, why not? What the heck?" But as I got into it, I realized, well, in academia, credentials are important. So I contacted the university to find out what it would take for me to complete my BA. And a few weeks later, they got back and they said, "Well, Mr. Utne, according to our records, you have your BA and you've had it since 1972. I blame the 60s on that. So I'd like to take a kind of snapshot of where we are today. And to do that, I want to quote Mark Bittman, who wrote recently in the New York Times. He's the food writer for the New York Times. And he was explaining his decision to join thousands of others in fasting as a protest against the Republican-led effort to cut food aid to the poor. Outraged, he noted, in 2010, corporate profits grew at their fastest rate since 1950, and we set records in the number of Americans on food stamps. The richest 400 Americans have more wealth than half of all Americans combined. The effective tax rate of the nation's richest people has fallen by about half in the last 20 years, and General Electric paid $0 to U.S. taxes on profits of more than $14 billion. Meanwhile, roughly 45 million Americans spend a third of their post-tax income on food. And still, they run out monthly. and 1 in 4 kids goes to bed hungry at least some of the time. Meanwhile, we face unprecedented environmental challenges. Al Gore was speaking to a group of young people at a meeting in Washington just a few weeks ago called Power Shift, and he listed some of these metrics. 2010 was the hottest year ever recorded. We had the biggest drought in Russia's history. The flood in Pakistan displaced 20 million people across an area the size of England, sweeping away 2.2 million hectares of farmland and disabling a nuclear-armed country. In Colombia, 2 million people are homeless due to flooding. In Australia, an area the size of France and Germany combined was flooded. Tennessee had a once-in-1,000-year rainfall, and most of the U.S. South, as I speak, is dealing with massive flooding. It's happening all over the world. As the temperature goes up, warmer air holds moisture, and so when it rains, you get floods. Also in the past year, we saw a block of ice 4 times the size of Manhattan slip into the ocean. Super typhoons appeared, 190 miles per hour winds, and it goes on. The list goes on and on. This is what you are graduating into, the world that you're stepping into out of today. Environmental writer Paul Hawken says, if you look at what's happening in the world and you aren't pessimistic, you simply don't understand the data. But if you meet the people who are working to restore the earth and the lives of people in need, and you aren't optimistic, you haven't got a pulse. So how do we navigate this shifting, challenging terrain? I suggest to you today that it's with your heart. Just last Sunday, I got to spend the day with His Holiness the Dalai Lama at the University of Minnesota. I was one of 10,000 people in the audience, but I heard him speak. Someone asked him, is the world getting better or is it getting worse? He answered without hesitation, definitely better. He explained, we have an awareness of human rights and ecology as never before. That's definitely better. And we have the internet, which means more information than ever before. That's also better. But we have to use it with compassion and wisdom. And this, he said, starts with warm-heartedness. Warm-heartedness leads to friendship, leads to trust, leads to speaking and acting honestly and truthfully, which develops genuine cooperation and a sense of community. It all starts with warm-heartedness. So how do we become warm-hearted? In my case, it was not easy. I was very much identified with my head, with ideas. My whole purpose in life was to find ideas that made a difference, whose time had come, ideas that might help alleviate suffering and liberate all sentient beings. But it was all from the head. So the story I want to tell you today is my own story of finding my heart, which is an ongoing process. You graduate today with degrees that show that you've got the smarts, but also the very fact that you chose them shows that you followed your heart into this realm of study, and presumably wherever that study takes you, into your work in the world. But it's an ongoing study. Plato said that the purpose of life is the tendance of the soul, the refinement, the education, the development of our souls. And he said to do that, we have to learn certain life lessons. And if you don't learn your lesson, the lesson just keeps getting thrown at you over and over until you get it. When I was 21, I was an architecture student at the University of Minnesota, and I got a growth in my neck about the size of a walnut. The university health service didn't know what to make of it. They gave me penicillin and tetracycline. It wasn't going away. Before I knew it, I was in hospital, and a Dr. Buchwald, who had one eyebrow across his forehead, was standing at the foot of my bed, kind of rubbing his hands and saying, "Yeah, we will have to go in and look at that." And they were going to do a biopsy, and my mother, very uncharacteristically, sort of threw her arms out and said, "Stop, don't cut my boy, just stop giving him the medicine." And miraculously, within a few days, this growth started to disappear. I got out of the hospital, and I ran into a hippie friend on the west bank of the university, and he said, and his name was Toad. And he said, "Hey man, there's this dude in Boston who can teach you to be your own doctor with food." And I went, "Far out." And I dropped out of college, and I went to Boston to study macrobiotics with Michio Kushi. And that led to studying Chinese medicine. And now when I'm 28 years old, I was studying acupuncture in London. And Paul Hawken, 44 years ago, wrote an article in East West Journal about Findhorn, the community in northern Scotland. And my young bride at the time and I decided that we would go up and check it out. And so I called and reached someone in the office who said, "Well, you've got to give us at least 2 or 3 months advance notice, because the BBC has done 3 television specials in the last 3 months and about our miraculous gardens. And so everybody wants to come." Just then, 2 little old ladies walked into the office and said that they were leaving the next morning for a week. And so the guy said, "Well, it looks like the devas, the fairies and elves and nature spirits, are looking out for you, so come on up." So we arrived the next morning, and from the moment we arrived, they treated us like we were visiting dignitaries, which I found very off-putting, being a Norwegian Minnesotan of Lutheran descent. And I was very distrustful of this sort of special treatment until I noticed that they were treating themselves and each other that way. And I thought, well, I'll get into it and be as magnificent or as corny as I am. And within a couple days, they asked me to address the whole community about Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And at this point, acupuncture was very exotic. It was nobody knew anything about it. James Reston hadn't had his appendix out yet, and Nixon hadn't gone to China yet. But I was very shy about getting up in front of a group, and I was reluctant to do it until I realized how encouraging they were. So I spoke to 120 people, and I started out by describing how to do Chinese facial diagnosis and how to tell with lines between your eyebrows mean that your liver's shot, and puffiness or dark circles under your eyes mean your liver is out of balance, or swollen lips are a sign that your large intestine may be too yin. And in the middle of this talk, I had a kind of epiphany, and I realized, here I'm teaching these people how to notice what's wrong with you, and this is a community based on noticing what's right with you. And for me, it was a 180-degree shift. And I went back to Boston, and I had all these people waiting to be treated by acupuncture, and they wouldn't have come to me, a 28-year-old novice, if they hadn't tried everything else first. So I was their last resort. And they came in with presenting symptoms like chronic migraines, severe menstrual bleeding and no relief, spinal fusions, and they were on cortisone and continuous pain. But they would be completely identified with their symptoms, but there was something truer about them than this partial view of themselves that they were identified with. And I couldn't help, having just been at Findhorn, but see this larger view of them than they were seeing of themselves. And every one of them, in a period of 3 weeks, 12 people reported back that they had a spontaneous remission and that they were their symptoms had gone away. And they wanted to attribute it to me or to Chinese medicine or to qi energy, and I realized I had no idea what was going on, that I was somehow participating, but I was more witness than cause. They were healing themselves, but I didn't know what the mechanism was. So I realized I either have to study Western medicine so I can be legitimate and hang out a shingle, or I have to get out of this as fast as I can. And that's when I got into journalism.